credit spreads, this is actually the highest probability trades that you can make in the market. We'll go through a little bit. I think if most people new to options will start off with a like covered call strategy, and a lot of times you get pretty successful at it. The problem is with covered calls, well, you can consistently make money on selling the call options. To do it as a covered call, you have to hold 100 shares. So what we're going to show you today is how to do the same strategy, whether it's selling the covered call or on the opposite side, selling a cash secured put, but without having to have 100 shares. So if you're someone that, or having to put up collateral to buy 100 shares. So if you're someone that's had any success selling covered calls, this is going to probably 10x your game if you can actually really get this down. It's something that you can do very consistently. There's a couple caveats that we'll go through, but by and far, if you had been selling covered calls or equivalents for the last month and a half, maybe 2 months in the market, you would be cleaning house for sure. Even over someone who was buying puts, just because you're getting paid upfront to open these trades. The only real difference is the time that it takes to actually get paid. Hit the disclaimer really quick first. So before buying or selling options, just jump into our disclaimer in the Discord. We have a link to characteristics and risks of standardized options. Just go ahead and read a copy of that before you start trading. So what's the difference? I think last week we did go through debit spreads, and for the most part, a lot of people take to debit spreads faster than credit spreads. I know, at least for me specifically, I absolutely did. There's a couple benefits to debit spreads. There's a couple benefits to credit spreads. And if you've been around for a while, if you talk to any trader that has been trading for any considerable period of time, you'll start to find out that there's really like two camps of traders. There's debit spread traders and there's credit spread traders. I think there was a, what is it? Theta gang. That was a thing, right? Like Wall Street bets Theta gang. That's a real, it's a real, like almost like religious argument in the options world. Personally, you guys know, I kind of actually, I fall in between the two. I don't actually believe that one is better than the other per se. When we go through it, both have a directional bias. Whether you're doing a debit spread or you're doing a credit spread, it really doesn't matter because they have a directional bias. The real difference is, when do I get paid? Debit spreads will actually pay you faster. The benefit to debit spreads, you risk less to make more. Credit spreads, you don't. So credit spreads, the trade-off is that you have an insanely high probability of winning, and it, like almost like completely winning. The disadvantage is that you're typically going to be risking more than you can actually make. So because the credit spreads will pay you up front what your max profit is, and we'll walk through this, your risk on those trades is typically going to be higher than what you can make. So from that perspective, that's, credit spread traders, I want to get paid now. Why would I wait? Time's always on my side with a credit spread. Absolutely on my side. More often than not, the credit spreads, you remember those stocks can do three things: go flat, go up, or go down. Credit spreads always have time on their side. So if a trade goes flat, you will make money on a credit spread. If you have a debit spread and a trade goes flat, you will lose money. That's just how it goes. So credit spreads, higher probability for sure, but the trade-off is that you risk a little bit more than you could actually make more often than not. So to go through this, we'll just revisit this. So last week we did debit spreads, and the top of this slide last week said buying call options and buying put options. So because a debit spread starts with buying the call or put that's closest to the money, it starts with buying a more expensive option on a debit spread, and you close the debit spread by selling a less expensive option. Well, On credit spreads, you're actually selling. We're going to do the opposite. You're going to sell an option to open, right? And you're going to sell an option that's more expensive than the option that you're going to buy. We're going to do the same thing as a debit spread, but we're going to flip it this time. So we're going to sell, if it's a call, we sell a call option first, and then we buy a less expensive option against it. If it's a put, we're going to sell closer to the money, more expensive put first, and we're going to buy a further from the money, less expensive put second. I hope that makes sense. In essence, the combination of those two options together, selling a more expensive one and buying a less expensive one, will result in a net credit to your account. I think that's as simple as I can get it. But, and again, because credit spreads by nature always have time on their side. So if the stock does nothing, then you win. If the stock moves in the direction, and I'll show you how to make them directional, that you want, you win also. Debit spreads, if a stock does nothing, typically you lose. If it goes in the opposite direction, you lose as well. So credit spreads by far have a higher probability of success. How do I make money? What's my risk? We'll go into it just a little bit. So credit spreads, we receive a credit up front, right? So that's the max profit. So whatever we receive out of the gate, that's the most money we can make. If you've sold call options in the past, the amount of money that you receive to sell the call against your stock position, that's the most that you can ever make. And the goal is to buy it back, and that's closing the position. So you sell it to open, and you want to buy it back for less than you received to close it. In a credit spread, we're going to do that same thing with the short option, but instead of having to own the stock or put up a lot of collateral to make an agreement to buy it, if you're doing the put side, instead of having to do that, we're actually going to buy another option that's going to do the same thing as if we had 100 shares. So if you want to sell a call, I can still do that, but all I need to do now is actually buy a higher price call or higher strike call or a less expensive call. And that's going to serve as my collateral against the short option. So we're going to sell something more expensive, buy something less expensive, and that's going to serve as our collateral, if that makes sense. There's going to be a distance between the two strikes. So let's say we'll go through it. So debit spreads, we pay to open them, right? So we're paying for a more expensive option, and then we're going to sell a less expensive option on a debit spread. And the net result is that we pay to open that. And those, we want to sell them for more than we bought them for. It doesn't require any difference. And last week we went through what the max profit was on a debit spread. It's the width of the strikes. We're going to use that same calculation, width of the strikes, on the credit spreads to kind of factor what our max loss is, what our max profit is. So debit spreads, this is the technical Investopedia definition. So vertical spread involves two simultaneously buying and selling of options the same type at the same time, expiration, but at different prices. So this is, the credit spread is buying and selling. It's the same thing, but the only difference is that when the option sold is more expensive than the option bought, the net credit results. That's it. Pretty simple. Here's the difference. Debit spreads, we're paying to open. Credit spreads, we're getting paid to open. The collateral, and so the collateral is going to be what the difference is between the strikes and the amount of what we receive. So we'll walk through that. So debit spreads, just review, we're going to get paid later. So we pay a little, we want to pay little now and sell it for more than we bought it, right? So the combination on a long debit spread, we've bought the right to own a stock or option. That's the buying of the long strike. And then we sell a less expensive short strike. So on the debit spreads, the width of the spread, let's say it's $10 wide, that's the max value. So I take what I pay minus the max value, that's the maximum profit on a debit spread. On a credit spread, we're going to essentially reverse the whole position. So we're actually going to get all of our profits right now. So we sell the strike first, and we want to sell a more expensive one. You made a conditional agreement to buy, which means we're going to sell an option. You made a conditional agreement to buy stock at a specific, and that means we're going to buy an option. And so we'll have a spread, right? So I'm going to do a range. Let's say you'll have a $10 range. If I receive $200 to do a $10 wide debit spread, then my max loss is going to be $800. So I received $200. The width of the spread is $10 wide. So the value of that spread is $1,000. I'm going to receive $200 to open it up. The width minus what I get paid is my max loss. So $800. So here we go. This is on the put side. And I just took this slide from our short calls and short puts presentation. So we had an example for a $100 stock, and I think it was Penn at the time, and we were selling a $100 put to make an agreement to buy Penn at $100. I think at the time Penn was trading at like, I don't know, $120. This sounds like a bad bet now because it's significantly lower than that, but we're just going to walk through what the mechanics of that trade look like. So to sell a put, we were going to sell a $100 put, and we were going to collect $800 to make that agreement to buy it in the future. We had to put up $10,000 in cash as collateral. So secure cash secured. So $10,000 in cash secured. That's our collateral, which is what we put out of pocket. And that went into that quote unquote escrow account. And we were getting $800 to make that agreement, which would have been an $8 discount on each of the 100 shares. Out of pocket, that would have cost $9,200. Whether it's margin or cash, you would have needed $9,200 of buy power in your account to make that trade. We could have actually done that, and some of you guys have done it if you're traded in the Discord. We can do the same thing, but with $400. So if you sold that same $100 put, you would have collected $800 just the same. But instead of putting up $10,000 of cash as collateral, all we're going to do is we're going to buy a lower strike put for less. We're going to pay $400 less than the $800 that we're going to collect. This is going to be a $10 wide spread out of pocket. So it's $10 wide. We are going to collect $400. This should actually be a $600. So if I collect $400 for a $10 wide spread, I'm going to need out of pocket $600. So sorry, guys, I will correct that. This is on the put side. So pretend this is a 6. Covered calls. We did a covered call example where if you owned 100 shares and we sold a $100 call, same thing, it was collecting $800 to do that. You would have needed the same $9,200 to put that trade on in your account or buy power. But we're going to be able to do the same thing, and we're going to sell a $100 call, and we could, instead of owning these 100 shares as collateral, all we're going to do is we're going to buy a less expensive call, and we're going to use this as our collateral. Cool. So out of pocket is $600. So we're going to collect this $400 on both of these situations. $400 is what we collect. $1,000 is the width of the spread. So $10 wide spread, $10.90. The difference is $10. $10 wide spread here, 100, 110. The difference is $10. That's $10 times 100. That's the max value of the spread. So the max value of the spread minus what we receive, max value of the spread minus what we receive, is what we have to put out of pocket. This is they're going to call it a margin requirement, but this is how much cash you're going to need to put in that quote unquote escrow account to be able to put this on the trade. So this is a super important number. This is your maximum loss. So you're going to receive your $400 up front, which is your maximum profit. The goal is to close the trade for less than $400. I want to buy it back for say $100. That would be your ideal goal. You're going to risk $600, which is 400 plus 600 equals 1,000. That's your max risk right there. We went through this last time. So these are the Greeks. So delta, volatility, theta, these all affect credit spreads the exact same way that they affect debit spreads. So when we go through the example trades, we'll actually end up with a position delta and a position theta. Since we're selling the more expensive contract, theta will absolutely be positive. We're going to get paid no matter what. If the stock goes nowhere, that's going to be on our side. Volatility, same rules apply. If it's too tight, it won't be that great for the trade. But on shorter dated options, on credit spreads, it actually does work in your favor, setting up the trade. So on the covered call webinar that we went through, there was a couple different things. There was, I don't know if you guys remember, but the delta, we had a definition of delta as being probability of moneyness, or like what is the probability of it being in the money. We're absolutely going to use that in the same way that you do your covered calls. So if you're used to selling a 15-20 delta call against your stocks, we're going to do the same exact thing. We want to do it also below support and above resistance. So if it touches, you guys have seen now after trading for a little while, if a stock will go maybe gap down below support for a second and bounce back up, that's when we want to put it on. But we want to put it on below support to give ourselves a little bit of wiggle room. We want to do it when options are overpriced. So we want to do it after big moves. If a stock has made like big moves, I don't know, more than average, we want to do these types of trades. So it's going to give us an advantage there. If a stock has earnings coming up, then we know that they're going to be overpriced because they're pricing in a little extra move than normal. We want to do it in those situations too. And we want to do it just the same exact way that you would be doing this for generating income. Couple, not rules of thumb, but guidelines. There's one caveat to credit spreads, and that's you want to take profit faster than normal. This is mostly because we're actually risking more than we have to make, whereas debit spreads, you can keep them on a little bit longer because you want the stock to kind of like get through the range that you buy in a debit spread. In a credit spread, once we get a move, it's super important to take the profits pretty quickly. We still are going to recommend doing them in lots of, let's say 5 or so, give or take, depending on your account. But you want to have multiples so you can take money off the table, and you want to do it starting usually about 25%. So the other one, risk and probability. So we just went through this, but that's using the delta as your probability of moneyness. And then just like debit spreads, for shorter time frames, we want to use tighter widths on the spread just to limit the downside risk. I think we'd mentioned gamma, or I said something that we were going to go over gamma. We've gone through delta, theta, and a little bit of volatility. So the Greeks are like the most important thing, but also the hardest thing to learn. So I'm trying to sprinkle these in a little bit at a time. Delta, we know, is the rate of change in the option for every $1 that the underlying changes. So if my delta, which shows up as like a decimal, right? Like if it's a 0.5 delta at the money, if the stock moves $1, then my option will change by 0.5 or 50 cents. But what happens if it changes $2? So the delta will change for every dollar that the stock moves. So gamma is the rate of change in the delta. So this is like, I don't know how, was it one of our buddies was, he's like, yeah, it's like the speed of delta, or like the math of delta. It is the, like, how fast delta will accelerate, but it's the number one like exponential component for options. This is what's like the compound effect, like the X factor. It's pretty static, and I'll show you guys how to know where these things are. And if you've ever traded with us and you see like, why do we buy the types of options that we buy? Well, it's actually because of the gamma relationship to delta. So we know that at the money options typically have a 0.5 delta. Well, at the money options, doesn't have to be at, near the money options actually have the highest gamma. So near the money and shortest in time have the highest exponential factor in option pricing. So shortest dated, closest to the money, those are the options that are going to give you the biggest moves one way or the other. Whether it's up or down, those are the ones that are going to give you the exponential. We'll have like the day traders doing, 200-300% like in a few minutes. It's because of gamma. It's not actually because of delta. It's mostly because of the exponential effect that delta that will happen to the delta. If you're buying options, this is just basics. Long options will benefit. So if you're buying calls or puts and it's very directional, you'll have a positive gamma. So that means that your option is going to exponentially increase. But if you're selling options, and this is why it's important for credit spreads, because we're going to be net sellers. So we're selling options. So why we take it off is because if, unlike a debit spread, if it goes against you, you can kind of give it some time. But for a credit spread, if it goes against you, it's going to be pretty bad pretty fast. And so that's why we do want to do a little bit tighter spreads. We don't want to do like a ton of time, 45 days at most, nothing further than that out. And we want to make sure that we have a fairly tight, maybe $10 wide at most spread, depending on the price of the option, because of gamma. So if it goes against us, we want to get out right away. And then as we make profit, we want to take profit faster, because remember, we got paid upfront our maximum profit. So if I got paid $100 to open a trade, and let's say I did 5 of them, so I collected $500, and now the trade is worth, instead of 100, maybe it's worth 50. So I got 5 of them still, so it's $250. Well, in that sense, my downside is usually going to be 4 or 5 times my upside or more. When we get to the trades, we'll actually go through it. But here's a visual of gamma. Sorry, this is just pulled from the internet. This is for a $50 stock. And so this is gamma, and the different lines are time. So shorter dated 3-month options have the highest gamma or less, nearest the money. So this is what we're showing. So 50 plus gamma, 0.5 plus gamma. That's going to be the big stuff. The 9-month is for more like leaps. So Y leaps are kind of like meh. Sometimes they're cool, but their delta doesn't exponentially grow like a shorter dated option. So you don't have the kind of upside that you would have in a sub 3-month option here. 6 months, I don't do a whole lot of 6 months, but they're kind of happy medium for this chart. So credit spreads, absolute highest probability trades that you can make. We always want to calculate the margin requirement before we open the trade. I say we want to calculate it because it actually won't tell you how much the margin requirement will be. It'll just pull it out of your account. So we need to know how to do that calculation. And we want to start out kind of further away from the money. And if we get close to the money, the closer we get to the money, the higher our gamma is and the more risk we have on the table. So that's kind of like your barometer. If you're close to the money and you're in a credit spread, you want to be pretty careful because it can go against you really fast.